Hey everyone, it's Jen.
And this is Lindsay.
And welcome back to Corpus Delicti. We are continuing our road to redemption, a rocky story.
If you're just now picking up, you are in part 2 of a 5-ish part series, so you'll want to go back for sure and listen to the first one. We're going to dive right in. We have a whole lot to cover, so we're just going to get started. We're going to do a quick recap just so y'all can remember high level. 68-year-old woman and her cousin are attacked. Midnight, knock on the door, opens the door. 68-year-old Ludi Mae Tucker is stabbed. She later dies of her injuries. Mamie Dutton is stabbed and survives. They both recall a short, stocky black male in a white shirt with blood on it. Originally, there is a man named Cool Breeze who is named in this crime because a VCR was taken from the victim's home and sold for crack at a crack house.
From there, the police interview several key witnesses and obtain several statements. In the end, a friend of the family of Cool Breeze points out a different person, and that different person is Rocky, and Rocky gets arrested. So here we go, Chapter 2, the VCR. Witness statements changed, and now Rocky is implicated in this crime. Now Rocky is on probation at the time for receiving stolen property. They call him in for just a random drug test. At this time, he does fail, and it violates his probation, so they do have the right now to arrest him. This is when they question him about Ludi Mae Tucker's murder. They asked him if he knows Butch. He says that he doesn't. Do you know Roadrunner? Now this is Raybon from the previous story. Do you know Marzell? And he says, yes, I know Marzell.
So he doesn't know Roadrunner or Butch, but he's like, yeah, I know Marzell. And they say, well, according to Marzell, and this is Marzell Ewing, he was in the last story, you sold a VCR to Butch on the night of the murder. Well, at this point, Rocky just hangs his head. He shakes his head and he's like, okay, I need to come clean. I know him. He does admit that he knows Butch and Roadrunner, and he says, yeah, I did sell a VCR that night for crack. But he says, I was definitely not involved in the murder. But they're asking themselves at this point, okay, if you didn't commit the murder, how did you get the VCR that you just admitted to selling? Rocky says that there is an alley that runs behind his house, which led right to the shot house. And he says, I found the VCR in the alley and I picked it up and I traded it.
Well, quite frankly, at this point, Rocky's timeline is a little bit shaky. He says he remembers seeing the police arrive at Miss Tucker's home about 40 minutes after he sells the VCR. Later, he said, it could have been 10 minutes. Then he says, look, I don't remember clearly, but we know they arrived within minutes. Then they said, we know you didn't find the VCR in the alley. Where did it come from? Just trying to get him to say that he got it from Miss Tucker's house. At one point, he even says, it was on the fence post in my backyard, and then goes back to saying it was in the alley.
So this alley, according to Rocky, always had stuff dumped back there. It was known for it, and it was not abnormal for people to go back there and try to look for things to sell. And we will find out as the story goes on that others agree with that. They say, yeah, that's common for the alley. So now they've caught him lying about knowing Butch and Roadrunner. He admits to selling a VCR, which these people changed their statements to say that he did. He says he found it in an alley, and his timeline is changing. So to be honest, at this point, it really doesn't look great for him. So he is officially arrested for the murder, and Cool Breeze is let go.
However, there is a very specific note here. Rocky is charged with capital murder. Breeze was just charged with murder. There is a stronger charge with a potential for a stronger punishment. So if you get just charged with murder, you can get life with the possibility of parole. If you get capital murder, you're up for the death penalty. If the state has one, Alabama does have the death penalty.
And we'll talk more in a later episode about why that may potentially be, but important note, they were not charged the same. But let's be honest, we would not be here right now doing this if this case was this cut and dry. In fact, it's anything but cut and dry. For one, we haven't specified this yet, but if you think back to when we covered Rocky's background last episode, you'll start to see some of this. And all of that in his background was for a very particular reason. But at this point in life, Rocky read at approximately a third grade level and could not tell time. So when you factor this in, there's a shaky timeline, and it seems a little bit less damning at that point. And this is something that's going to come up in way, way, way more detail in a future episode. It's also 30 days later. It's a month after the crime. And when you are involved in something that you don't realize is a big deal at the time, you're less likely to remember it. You're going to remember triggering events, big events, life events. But at this point, he didn't know anyone had died until the next day. He didn't know he was a suspect till a month later.
Exactly. So you tend to remember memories that have an emotional attachment. This night did not have an attachment. It was easily forgotten. All right, so let's go to the trial. It takes 2 years before this trial is to begin. And here's where we're going to get into a very deep dive, because there are two big issues. One we've already stated is the question of Rocky's guilt. But the other is there are a lot of issues with the actual trial. Now, this is where the first issue occurs. Rocky is represented by 2 court-appointed attorneys. Morgan County did not, and still does not, have a public defender. Hence, the court has to appoint an attorney. One of these is John Mays. The other is Larry Madison. John Mays is board certified in criminal trial advocacy.
Mays graduated from the nation's criminal defense college, Mercer Law, which is an advanced criminal defense college. So we just got to digging, looking up these guys. And what we are about to tell you guys comes straight from the Courier-Journal, the Tampa Times, the Tampa Tribune, the Morning Call, and the Indiana Gazette. We're not reporters. We weren't there, but this is what we found. The Morning Call, February 11th of 1987 says, quote, John Mays of Decatur, the attorney for the Klan, told the jury in opening statements he didn't know what Dees would offer, but none of the Klan leaders thought the Donald murder was humorous. And this is in reference to a lynching of a 19-year-old named Michael Donald.
The Courier-Journal. This was published May 2nd, 1979, and this is written by Jay Lawrence, and it is quoted, Mays is the personal attorney of Robert Shelton of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the imperial wizard of the United Klans of America. Mays said yesterday that he could come at the behest of Adams and that part of Adams' legal fees were being paid by the Klan.
And this one is in reference to there was a Klan parade planned, and they got the permits to hold it, but the city was requiring them to have insurance in case something went wrong. And they were fighting that, saying that that's unconstitutional. They shouldn't have to do that. So the Tampa Tribune, September 21st, 1979, by Bill King, says, he said the Klan's corporate lawyer, John Mays of Decatur, Alabama, will meet with several attorneys next week.
From the Courier-Journal of Kentucky, September 23rd, 1980, by Mervyn Alspin, and it quotes, also Sherman Adams, Grand Dragon of the Klan in Kentucky, said that the Klan rally is planned for 7 p.m. Saturday. Adams says speakers will be Don Henson, Grand Dragon of Tennessee, and John Mays, a Klan attorney from Alabama. Now, in the same publication in 1980 by Shelton Schaffer is quoted, in addition to Draper and Adams, speakers included other people's names, and John Mays, the Klan attorney from Alabama who is a native of Pikeville. Henson and Mays bear testimony that the Klan is no longer destined to be clandestine and its members stereotyped. Neither man wore a robe or hood, and both professed their allegiance openly. Henson had a dark black beard and wore a brown suit and a white shirt and an open collar. Mays wore a suit and tie. Their espousals, though articulate, were unmistakably and typically those of the Klan.
All right. So this is who is representing Rocky, John Mays and Larry Madison. So next we have jury selection. Rocky ended up with a jury of 11 white people. The 12th juror was a younger black male. And important note here, this is nowhere close to representative of Decatur, Alabama, which is about 60% white. We looked up statistics, and Jen is actually from not terribly far from there, and it's not representative. Now,
not at all.
Not only that, the goal is, when you're selecting a jury, is to get a fair and unbiased group of people. And they call it a jury of your peers. You are entitled to a jury of your peers. So people like you, normal, everyday people. You're not supposed to have any preconceived notions, biases, or anything that would prevent you from looking at a case objectively. You can also try and challenge certain jurors to keep or replace them. Doesn't mean it'll necessarily be honored. The rules vary from state to state, but that's the overall general goal. And if you're paying attention to recent events, the Derek Chauvin case is going through jury selection right now. That is the police officer who was involved in the killing of George Floyd. And so I've been looking at a lot of articles about that jury selection and what constitutes a peer for him, since it's been all over the news and all that. So there's a lot of good information out there right now about what it's supposed to look like.
Judges can also dismiss jurors who can't put aside their feelings and apply the law impartially, that is, with or without implied bias. Now, that was from nolo.com. Now, Cornell University reads, questions concerning about suitability of jurors usually are whether they have any information about the case, whether they're related to a party in the trial, or whether their prior experience might make them prejudiced. A prospective juror will be excluded if the lawyer can show the judge that he or she might act unfairly in the trial. That is the key point that I'm trying to make here, that if a juror might act unfairly because of a preconceived prejudice, and it might be unbeknownst to them too. I mean, because the questions are laid out in such a way to unveil hidden prejudices without just sometimes they do come out and just say it, but it is designed for this, and you can either strike or accept.
And another important note, you get so many strikes from the jury without question. You don't have an unlimited amount, and then the rest of them you have to prove why. So again, the lawyer has to be on top of it and say, this isn't representative of what we're trying to achieve. Now, of course, the prosecution and the defense are going to be all about different people. Like, oh, this one sounds like they're going to be good for me. But if no one else strikes it down, or if you're out of strikes or whatever, and strikes is not the technical term, but just to make it simple, since people are overseas too, that's generally at a high level how it works.
All right, so we've actually got a few of the strikes and the acceptance from the actual jury pool. So what we're going to do is we're going to role play here. Lindsay, do you want to be the juror and I'll be the court?
Sure. Now, this person did make it onto the jury. And like Jen said, I will be the juror. I'm an ex-police officer from the state of Michigan. As I say, I have been on the state side.
Well, do you think you can try this case, if you are selected to serve on the jury, on the law and the evidence as it comes to you throughout the course of the trial?
I would certainly try to stay open-minded, although I have been on the other dwelling of those types of issues. I would try to do that, yes.
I want to find out now in what instance you might be more inclined to recommend a death penalty. For example, if the fact that the victim is elderly, do you think you might be more inclined to impose the death penalty? If so, let me know.
I want to say I have a lot of compassion for old people. I have a great-grandmother that I cared for.
You think that might be a factor that you might consider?
I would very much try to keep an open mind.
That's why I'm asking you questions this way. You would keep an open mind but that is a factor you might weigh a little bit more than some others. So you can see what he's doing here. The defense attorney and the court are trying to undercut his answers to say, okay, you do have a great grandmother that you care for. Do you see how that can come into your prejudice here?
Another important note, I did not realize this. I learned something new, but when it is a death penalty case, you can make sure that they are, quote unquote, qualified to recommend the death penalty. And what that means is if someone flat out comes out and says, I am against the death penalty, they will most likely, and from what I understand, should be struck because they want you to at least be able to consider it if it is warranted in the case. So that question, I think, is what they're getting at there. But they talk about him being an ex-police officer, and then it actually goes on. He says, I have a lot of compassion for elderly people.
Mr. Smith, I may know your answer to this, but I may not. But how many of you would tend in a situation where a police officer testified that it happened a certain way and a non-police officer said it happened another way, with nothing else to guide you? How many of you would believe the police officer over the other fellow?
I would believe the police officer.
Now, to be fair, twice he did say that he would try to keep an open mind, but that is two potential biases in one sitting.
Because you've got the elderly person that he cares for, and then you have him not only saying, I was a police officer, I understand the police side of things, but also said, I would flat out believe a police officer over someone else.
And then there was a juror who said something to the effect of, if you make it past the grand jury, you're guilty. You gotta be. And this person made it through and served on the jury. Now, grand jury and the actual trial are two very different burdens. So in a grand jury, you just have to have the burden of, could it have been? Yes, no. The jury, they're way two extraordinarily different ways.
And that's important if you're one of our overseas listeners to understand. The grand jury is basically where they say, there is enough to potentially have a case here. They're not saying you're guilty. They're not saying you're not guilty. They are saying, hey, we hear the charges. We are officially going to bring the charges because we think that there is enough to at least have a trial. Now, there is an old saying in the U.S. that you can indict a ham sandwich. You can say that, we're charging a ham sandwich with being disgusting, let's just say, and you can put it through a grand jury and go to trial. You don't necessarily have a whole lot to get there. So this juror who made it onto the jury is saying, if you make it past that, you're guilty. They've looked at you and they've already thought there's enough here, so you're guilty.
So now we're going to start the trial. We're going to go through some of the witness statements and testimonies. We're going to start with the people who actually saw activity that night. One thing we noticed immediately is that the tone was set for a very quick trial, which will be very important later on. For an example, the prosecutor said in his opening statements, we're going to move it along as best as we can and try to expedite as well as we can. Is that bad? Is that wrong? Don't really know, but it sets the tone. But if you're going into it a death penalty trial, you probably don't want to rush it. And you don't want to go in with the expectation that it's going to be expedited.
And it's like you said, it does at least set a tone. And keep this in mind, because again, it is relevant later. So the other thing that we noticed was in the defense opening statements. And we're going to read this here. They say, the evidence of the area where this crime was committed is going to be like looking into the very pit of hell. And it goes on later to say it's an area, the evidence will show, that decent people don't have any business going to. Nobody could have any legitimate business there unless you absolutely are so poor that you can't live anyplace else. So clearly, the strategy here is to cast doubt on those who are about to give testimony implicating Rocky, which we already know some of them. There's drugs involved, there's alcohol involved, there's all sorts of stuff involved. So that's the strategy. But it also could potentially cast doubt in a juror's mind not only onto Rocky, but the victim, Mrs. Tucker, as well, because they lived there. They were part of it. They were right in that area, too. Now, before we get into this, let's explain the area, because this is going to be very important. So picture for a second a lowercase t. Okay, you've got a four-way intersection. The north and south line is 6th Avenue. The east and west is Moulton Drive, and Moulton Drive on the east side starts to kind of dip down just a little bit and goes into Gordon Drive. On the top right quadrant, that little corner, is Rocky's house. Moulton Street is a relatively busy road. There's stoplights. Right across from Rocky is Mrs. Tucker's house. On the top left quadrant, directly to the left of Rocky's house, is a florist. So kind of keep that in mind, because that's kind of where everything takes place.
Mammy Dutton takes the stand. She recalls how she didn't see the person who committed the crime, and all she saw was the light-colored shirt. She cannot indicate if it was Rocky, Breeze, or even a black man at all with any kind of certainty. She says the only reason she thought it was a black man was because of his voice. However, that day, Mammy did see Rocky. Ludi Mae had pointed him out earlier that day when they were outside, and Ludi Mae had told her that Rocky is the one who comes and borrows ice sometimes.
So she had seen him. She knew what he looked like. That's Rocky. So then the woman who took the 911 call takes the stand, and this is part of what she recalled from Miss Tucker's phone call. She was breathing real hard. I asked her, what did he look like? And she said it was a black male or black man. I don't remember which. And I kept asking her, what did he look like? And she said she would be gasping, and she would say a white shirt. She may have said white t-shirt. She said white shirt with blood on it. I kept asking her questions. I don't remember what they were now, but I remember her saying cut. I don't remember what else. She would say knife. She would say one word at a time because she was having trouble breathing. I heard Officer Tilley come on the scene and start talking to her, and I disconnected the line because I knew I didn't need to stay on the line any longer.
Now, just a few things here. This does line up with Officer Tilley, and what he said happened that same night. Again, it's obvious Miss Tucker took the time to explain in detail what she could about who did this. And Officer Tilley also said this too. So again, why didn't she just say Rocky? Why did she struggle with every single detail when she just had to point and say Rocky, which she did not ever say his name?
She also says the word cut. Now, we are not entirely sure in what context because the 911 operator said she's going in and out, and Miss Tucker was stabbed. So was she talking about a stab wound? But typically that's not a cut. Typically that's a big open wound. She actually confirms this later in the testimony when she is asked again, did she say the word cut? And she says yes.
Then Officer Tilley takes the stand. He basically tells the exact same story. And he talks about dusting for prints, seeing the footprints outside. Now, as we talked about in the first chapter of this series, nothing was done with the footprints. No photographs, no measurements, nothing but jotting it down in his notebook stating that they were there. We have no idea how big they were or if it was a man's shoe versus a woman's shoe. We have no clue.
I will say, though, he does specify there were several sets of prints. Whatever that means. Does that mean it's several sets from the same person going back and forth? What does that mean? So next is Howard Godby. He is another one of the officers that arrived right after Officer Tilley, and he confirms Tilley's story. But this is also added. I will be the attorneys. Jen will be Howard Godby, the officer. Did you actually speak with her, or were you present when Officer Tilley was talking to her?
I spoke with her.
And her description was that the individual was wearing a white t-shirt with blood on it?
Yes, sir.
Did she indicate to you any familiarity with the person that had stabbed her?
No, sir.
Did she make any indication at all that she might have been aware of who he was or recognized him in any way at all?
No, sir. Next up is Vicki Bolden. She lived in the home with Annie Sue Crittenden, her daughter, and Butch. So remember, Annie was Percy's sister, and Butch and Annie Sue's daughter were in a relationship. She recalled that she was home the night and saw a man bringing in the VCR. Now this time, I'm going to be the lawyer and Lindsay's going to be Vicki. Sometime that night, did you see anyone bring in a VCR?
Yes.
Do you know that person?
No.
Was it Valentine?
No.
Where were you when they brought in the VCR?
On the porch.
Can you describe the person who brought the VCR in?
He is kind of short and stocky.
White or black man?
Black man.
Was he young or old?
I couldn't tell. So later on during cross-examination, she elaborates on who she saw just a little bit. And we'll keep the same roles, Jen as the attorneys, and I will be Vicki.
Now, you stated in your first statement that you noticed the individual who sold the VCR at Annie Crittenden's place. You saw the person who sold the VCR, correct?
No, I didn't really see him. I just saw him coming up on the porch. I don't know who he was.
You said that he had on a long coat?
Yes, with a hood.
With a hood?
It had a hood on it.
And a baseball cap?
Yes.
But you never saw his face?
No.
Who did he hand the VCR to?
I only know he had it in his hand.
Who did he hand the VCR to?
I don't know. Whoever he gave it to. I just got off the porch when he came back outside.
You only saw Cool Breeze there once, correct?
Yes.
The coat you saw this person wearing when he brought the VCR to the crack house, the coat he was wearing was a long coat?
It wasn't really long. It came a little above the knees.
A little above his knees. And he was wearing the coat?
Yes.
The coat was not wrapped around the VCR?
No, I didn't see it wrapped around the VCR.
So I guess the point the attorney is saying here, that it was a long coat.
It's coming right above the knees. He's got a baseball hat on. The coat had a hood, and this VCR was not wrapped up in the jacket. Those are the main points to take away from that. And we are about to hear from several more people, but before we do that, we're going to take a quick break.
All right, Delictables, welcome back. Next, we're going to hear from Parcell Yarbrough. Remember, he's the one who went around asking about the VCR, and he's the one who took it to the police. He tells how he took the VCR from the house, put it in his van, called the police, met them, and handed it over to them. He's very specific that nobody else touched this VCR. He had taken it from the house to the van and thus to the police. And what's interesting is that he called the police and said he was bringing it to them. Why in the world would the police allow him to do that?
Yeah, I don't know protocol for this, but it seems strange. You would think that the police want to try to do that themselves. Go get it. Go see the scene where it is. It's, where did you find it? Let me come get it. But he says, hey, I got this VCR. I'm going to come and meet you.
Well, even more, this would give the police cause to search a known shot house.
Absolutely. More on that to come. So Tyrone Elliott is next. If you recall, he's the one who worked at the country club with Breeze's dad. He talked to the investigator. He implicated Rocky first, and then the others followed. So this investigator that he had spoken to was the one that was hired by Cool Breeze's team to do his own investigation. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time on this one, a little bit more, just because he's the one who originally brought Rocky into the picture. So he recalls how he was at the hospital that night with his son. His son had had an asthma attack. He didn't have a car, so he gets a ride. They go to the hospital. After he gets picked up from the hospital, he and the people he's with, they go drop one person off. They all go to what they called the Iranian store to pick up some alcohol. It's just a little corner store that sells liquor, wine, whatever. At this point, he says they're stopped at a stoplight right outside Miss Tucker's house going east. So remember that T that we drew. And Mrs. Tucker's house is to the right of him. So we have another exchange here. I will be the attorneys and Jen will be Tyrone Elliott. While you were sitting there waiting on the light, did you see anything unusual or out of the ordinary that caught your attention?
Yeah, I saw a guy with what I thought at the time was a stereo component or something like that. He got my attention because of the way he was acting. He was looking all around and acting suspicious. That's what caught my attention. I told Tanisha, I said, I bet he stole that thing. And Tanisha hollered out of the car, I bet you stole that thing. And the guy trotted across the street and over by a bush. And after that, I didn't see him again. We went to the store and got to the store, and the store was closed. So we came back and I told Larry, I said, I'll get the beer from the bootlegger. This is going to be referring to Annie Crittenton's house.
What time would this have been? Do you know what time the store closed?
The store closed about midnight.
So note, the store was closed when they got there, according to this story, which means it would have been sometime after midnight if the store closes at midnight. We know the 911 call came in at 12:19, so technically this does fit the timeline. He is basically saying, I saw this person with the VCR right after the murder leaving Miss Tucker's house. He's acting shady. He's crossing the street. He's looking all around, and he goes and he hides behind a bush. He had said originally that they left the hospital around 11 o'clock. However, they present the hospital records, which shows that they were discharged from the hospital at about 9:30. So if they went basically straight to this area, according to his story, it would not have been after midnight. So did he forget some things that happened in between? Did he see Rocky earlier? Did he see someone else? Did he not see anyone at all? Those are the questions. So we're going to pick back up with the exchange. Again, I'm the attorney. While you were there, you said you saw a fellow come in with a VCR on Moulton Street.
Yes, sir.
Did you know this fellow?
I didn't know him at the time.
Do you remember anything about how this fellow was dressed?
Yeah, he had on something similar to this, what I got on here.
Had he changed any type of clothing from the time you saw him on Moulton until you saw him down here? So real quick, they're saying, remember they said that they're going to drive to the shot house. And so they're saying, hey, this guy actually showed up at the shot house too.
Yeah, when I saw him at the bootleggers, he had his jacket off and he had the VCR in the jacket.
Do you mean he had his jacket off or he had the VCR stuck under the jacket?
He had his jacket off and the VCR under it.
What was he wearing under his jacket?
I didn't pay any attention to that.
Light, dark, medium color?
It was dark.
Did he have any kind of hat on or anything?
I don't remember.
Do you know Anthony Ballantyne?
Yes, I do.
Was this fellow you saw Anthony Ballantyne?
No, it wasn't.
Would you describe this fellow for us that you saw?
Yes, sir. He was short and stocky.
White man or black man?
Black man.
Tyrone, can you identify that person?
Yes, I can.
Is he here in the courtroom today?
Yes, he is. This questioning goes on, and he goes on to point Rocky out in the courtroom, saying that Rocky was the man he saw. Now, let's stop for a second and talk about this because a few things do stand out. Now, he recalls the VCR was wrapped in a man's jacket. Now, Vicky Bolden said the opposite. It does highlight problems with eyewitness testimony. Both of the past two testimonies, Vicky and Tyrone, used the same exact initial description of the man they saw. They both said short. They both said stocky. Now, this was before they said anything else about race or anything. And this is interesting because it's the exact same verbiage Miss Tucker used to describe her attacker. And it's the theme we will continue to see. Not similar. The exact same verbiage. So it's almost like they were coached.
Not only that, since that is the description the victims gave, that is the description that was in the news. Then on cross-examination, this exchange occurs. Now, this guy that you saw leaving from the area of Ludie Mae Tucker's house, was wearing dark clothing?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Was he wearing a hat of any kind?
I don't remember.
Do you recall anything else out of the ordinary or anything that sticks out in your mind about the way he was dressed?
No.
Was all of his clothing dark?
As far as I can see, I didn't pay attention all that much.
Was his coat off?
Yeah, it was off.
What kind of shirt did he have on?
I didn't pay no attention to what he had on.
Do you have any idea? Do you know if it was a white shirt or anything?
No.
Did you notice anything about the color at all?
No.
Did you notice any blood stains on his shirt?
No.
So, a few more things here. He can't recall the clothing. You can't recall if there was a hat or blood. At first, you say, I don't know what color it was, light, medium, or dark. Then you say dark. He's not paying attention all that much. He says it twice. He says, I didn't pay all that much attention. Then again says, I didn't pay no attention to what he had on. But you could tell it was Rocky. So not only that, he admitted that he didn't even know Rocky at the time, and he had never seen him before. Because when they say, did you know the person you saw? He says, no, not at that time. He's saying, I didn't realize who he was until later. So you don't know the guy. You can't identify. You said you didn't pay a whole lot of attention, but you can without certainty say it was Rocky.
You didn't even go to the police until a month later. As his testimony goes on, he says his brother-in-law is a police officer, and he told his brother-in-law about the exchange that night after his brother-in-law mentioned the VCR being stolen from Miss Tucker's house. But you wait a month? He does say that investigators asked him about it, but they didn't take a statement. Don't know if that's true or not, because we can't confirm that part, and we have a lot of court documentation. We have a lot of police documentation.
Yeah, we don't know if they actually questioned him or not, but point being, he did not come forward with this. He did not reach out to the police and say, I know something. He did not talk to an investigator and say, I know something until a month later. And yeah, important to note, it was when Cool Breeze's investigator found him and he found out about the $5,000 award.
And plus, Tyrone worked with Cool Breeze's dad. There is a familiar connection right there.
Correct. So then they start to ask him about that statement that he did make a month later. Again, I am still the attorneys. Look at it as long as you need, but I need to know if you agree that is the statement you gave to the police and you signed at the police department.
Yes.
Somebody else wrote it out for you, didn't they?
Right.
But you told them what to write down.
Yes, I did.
Were you telling them the truth?
Yes, I was telling the truth.
Let's start here. Look at the bottom of page 2. Now, you testified a moment ago that the guy was short and stocky, and that's what you say in the statement. The guy was short and stocky and darker than I am.
Yes.
You say he had on a cap, dark-colored clothes, and a jacket, too.
Yes.
So you do remember, you did say he had on a cap at that time, didn't you?
Yeah, that's in there.
Well, do you remember it now?
I don't.
So as it goes on later, we're picking up a little bit further on. Who first told you about the reward that the governor offered in this case?
Jerry McDaniel.
What did he tell you had been offered?
He didn't say what had been offered. He said he was going to check to see if anything was offered on the case.
Jerry McDaniel, an investigator for Cool Breeze Ballantyne's lawyer, told you that there was a reward in this case.
He told me he thought there was a reward. He was going to check and see. He never told me.
Do you remember talking with Jerry McDaniel, Cool Breeze Ballantyne's investigator?
Yeah, I do.
Do you remember telling him all this happened around 11 o'clock p.m.?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what time it was.
So there's that 11 o'clock p.m. saying, we left the hospital, went out there, saw the guy crossing the street, but then the hospital records show 9:30. So next, we have Chris Garth. Her real name is Crystal. She goes by Chris, and she was with Tyrone Elliott and his crew that night. And her story mostly lines up as far as being at the stoplight, seeing the man on the other side of the road. Now, she was driving, so we'll stick with me being the investigator. Now, Jen is Chris. Can you describe, you say the fellow you saw the first time was the same fellow you saw the second time?
Uh-huh.
And they're talking about at the shot house that second time. Can you describe what he looked like?
All I know is he was short and stocky.
Black man or white man?
Black man.
Now, do you believe you would be able to identify that fellow you saw out there?
Uh-huh.
Is he here in court today?
Yeah.
If you would, point him out to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
Now, she does identify Rocky. Here we see short and stocky again. Also, keep in mind, this is all after midnight. It is dark. She says she saw a man from the traffic light. Now, she is in the car. It's not like they were right up beside him. She was the one driving. So think about you driving along a busy street. You're parked at a red light, and somebody away from the street you see crunched over in dark clothing with what looks like a stereo component under your hand. Then someone from your car yells, "I bet you stole that, didn't you?" And then he stashes it in a bush.
So speaking of short and stocky, because this is the third time that we've heard those exact words. How tall was Rocky Myers? Well,
it depends on who you ask.
Good question. So according to the Department of Corrections site, he is 5'9". And according to the autopsy, Mrs. Tucker was 5'5". So one thing that popped into my head is, would she have identified him as short? Maybe, maybe not. You can still know if someone is short for their size, but that's a little bit taller than she was. However, Rocky says he's 5'6". His son says he was close to the same height as Breeze, who was either 5'10" or 5'11", which would sound closer to that 5'9". However, again, there are court documents that say he's 5'2".
So just for full disclosure, we have 5'2", 5'9", 5'6". I am 5'3", so I'm a touch shorter than Tucker. If a man is 5'6" and taller, I'm not going to call him short and stocky, because he is going to have to be about my height, maybe an inch or two more than me. So anything about 5'5" and below, I would call short and stocky.
Yeah, like I'm 4'11", and my definition of short is very different. Even if I see a male, for example, my brother is about 5'9". Some people call him short. He is not short to me. He seems very average. But I mean, this is a massive height discrepancy. So it's interesting to me that the only time we see him mentioned that short, the 5'2", is on documents referring to the case specifically. And again, that's just an observation. I don't know how they measured him, but it's only on the documents actually related to the case that it says it, which is just kind of weird.
Now, next is Tanisha Irving, who was also with them. She is going up on the stand. I'm going to be Tanisha, and Lindsay's going to be the attorney again.
Now, can you describe for us what this fellow looked like? Was he white or black?
He was a black man. He was short and stocky.
And I believe you previously told the police you couldn't identify him. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
Do you know Anthony Ballantyne or Cool Breeze?
Not personally.
Were you shown a photograph of him?
Uh-huh.
Can you tell us whether or not the man you saw was Mr. Ballantyne?
No.
Can you tell us, or was it not him?
It was not him.
And you cannot tell the jury that this is the man you saw, can you? And he's referring to Rocky at this point.
No.
So we've talked before about how using pictures is problematic. Think back to our Delayed Justice series. There's so many variables that go into identifying someone. You've got lighting, clothing, and this is what she used to identify Cool Breeze. So they say, was it this man? And she says no. But she also can't say that it was Rocky. Now, keep in mind, she's the one who yelled out the window at the man. She was on that side of the car. She rolled her window down. She couldn't even tell who she was yelling at. So how could everyone else? She actually looked at this guy and yelled at him.
Not to mention, they were all with the guy who came forward once the reward was offered. Now, let's talk about that just a touch more. There are several people in this car. They all remember yelling out the window. That makes it more likely that it did happen. But Rocky had no reason to be in that area with the VCR. The alley was right behind his house. The alley ran straight up to the shot house. He never would have had been on that corner. Even if he had killed Miss Tucker and took the VCR from the house, he would have gone straight across. All he had to do was walk across the street.
So basically what they're saying, and we'll get into it more in a little bit, And it may even actually be in the next episode. I'm losing track at this point. So we know that Rocky's house is in that top right quadrant. Miss Tucker's is in the bottom right. And the florist is over in the top left, with 6th Street running right down the middle. They say that they are driving east. So Tanisha is facing, she's on the side of Miss Tucker's house. They see this guy going from Miss Tucker's house across the street and running to cross over to where the florist is on the other side of Rocky's house. That has Rocky going down main roads when there is an alley, and there's 2 separate alleys, so bear with us here. Miss Tucker's house has an alley that starts kind of in her driveway and goes south. And then there is an alley behind Rocky's house that kind of goes up towards 6th. So he could have gone through Miss Tucker's alley driveway straight across to the alley behind his house and never been on this main intersection corner. It makes no sense. If you just killed someone, stole something, possibly have blood on you, why are you going to go out underneath the streetlight, cross over to the florist, and go up the main road?
Yeah, it makes no sense why somebody who would be possibly covered in a victim's blood run down a street that has streetlights, you have traffic, and to be seen.
Now, he did have to cross. He still had to cross, but he didn't have to cross right at that light, which is right where the florist is. He did not have to cross right there.
Exactly. Next up is Leon Madden. Now, this is Butch. Now, important note about Butch. There's reason to believe that he may have been a confidential informant. This type of thing is very hard to find out and confirmed. Believe me, we've tried several avenues several times.
And so have Rocky's lawyer and investigator.
And there are multiple people who said he was.
Well, this is interesting, though, because if you think back to the night of the crime, Officer Tilley was patrolling that area. He said he was out on a suspected drug call, and that's why he was so close to Miss Tucker's house. Well, remember, he said, I found nothing, and I was wrapping up. Now, we know for a fact that Butch was out operating that night. We know that they were all out there. There's people out on the porch. Is that relevant? Maybe, maybe not.
Also, the officer wrote out his statement as well with Butch. Now, Butch tells how the police were looking for him once Percy brought the VCR. So he went up to the police station. I mean, this man had guts. Or did he have protection for being a CI? He tells them immediately that it was somebody named Rocky. He didn't know if Rocky was his first name or if it was a street name. And he didn't know him well, and he had only met him the day before. So again, we're going into the questioning. Lindsay's going to be the attorney, and I'm going to be Butch, the drug dealer.
At some point, did you tell the police that Cool Breeze sold you the VCR?
Nope.
That he gave you the VCR?
No.
Did the police at one time believe Valentine gave you the VCR?
Yes, by me saying it wasn't Breeze, it was Rocky that gave me the VCR. They said the statement that Willie Reese gave them, they figured I was lying.
You told them that Rocky sold it to you, but Willie Reese told them that Cool Breeze sold it to you.
Right. The reason he did that is because he got into an argument that night, some chump change money. I guess that's why Willie Reese said he did. He was real upset about it.
He was mad at Rocky?
He was mad at Breeze.
The police were leaning on you when you were telling them it was Rocky because he was telling them that it was Breeze?
Right. It was like 3 or 4 page statement and that he had made. They kept saying, Leon, you're lying and protecting him because it wasn't Rocky. And I said, you got to believe what you want. I'm telling you the truth. I can't make you believe me.
Did they finally get you to sign a statement saying it was Breeze?
Yes, sir.
You did?
Yes, sir, I did.
So another thing that Butch goes on to say is that both Cool Breeze and Rocky tried to buy crack on credit that night. And he says, look, Breeze knew better. Breeze had used collateral before, and he knew that Butch is not going to do credit. Rocky didn't. He hadn't known Rocky for a very long time. And he told Rocky that collateral was an option, but credit was not. Both men left, and both men came back several times that evening. So then he recalls when Rocky came in and sold the VCR. Again, I'm the attorneys. Okay, Rocky had dark clothing on?
Yeah, it was dark.
When you say Rocky traded you the VCR, did you see whether or not he was bleeding?
No.
Was he bleeding?
I didn't notice any blood or nothing.
Did he in any way indicate to you that he had been injured?
No.
In a fight?
No.
Did you notice any blood on his clothing?
No.
Did he complain to you about pain?
No.
So then Butch has people put the VCR away. He says, go put it in the bag, take this thing away. He leaves and closed up shop not too terribly long after that. So now let's kind of recap what we've heard tonight.
Rocky admits selling the VCR, which he says he found in the alley behind his house. Remember, when Angela Acklin first called police, she originally saw Breeze in that very alley, an alley known for being a dump spot. If police were starting to surround the area, could Breeze have dropped it there and Rocky come through and grabbed it after? Conflicting statements about the man on the side of the road. They saw someone holding something and they were yelling at the window at him, but other details vary.
One of the consistent things, though, is that this person who they are saying is Rocky, well, 2 out of 3 of them are, the third one can't identify him. They say he's wearing dark clothing. And no one noticed any blood or injuries. What's interesting here is, though, don't know if you guys have picked up on this yet, they say we saw this guy leaving Miss Tucker's house. We saw him walking, crossing the street to go up to the shot house. We see him at the shot house. He's wearing dark clothing. Well, both victims said that the killer was wearing a white shirt. So how the heck do you explain this? Are they saying that Rocky just magically changed clothes on his way out of the house? Because again, they're saying we saw him leaving. And this goes for Tyrone Elliott too, who said he saw him leaving the house. Now, keep in mind, they say they did see him at Butch's that night. So it is possible that they saw his clothing at Butch's, and it kind of is one of those things where in your mind, you remember that clothing. They remember him selling the VCR. They're like, oh, well, most people don't do credit, but hey, so they remember him for some reason, and maybe it gets applied elsewhere, if that makes sense. But again, the reward money, this is the same guy who was offered the reward money, and these are the same group of people who are using the exact words, short and stocky. Now, there's a lot of words you can use to describe someone who's short and stocky. They're heavy, solid, chunky, small, vertically challenged. I mean, there's so many different things you can say, and for them all to match up perfectly to what the victims said, which was in the newspapers, really stands out to me.
One thing to mention, and this is just purely a question to think about, if Butch was a CI, would that give the police extra pull with him? It wouldn't be hard to say, tell us what we want to hear, or we're going to peg you for everything we know you've done. Not to mention, if Roadrunner is Butch's right-hand man, it wouldn't be hard to sway him either. So the police have a hook into Butch. If they are working with others thinking, rightfully, wrongfully, that Rocky's their guy, because now they have what they think is an independent person coming in and identifying, they're going to lean on him to turn Roadrunner.
And just to explain, again, we do have international listeners, confidential informant. If you're not familiar, if you know someone's doing something, you can kind of say, hey, you need to be the lookout for us. You're a drug dealer. We need to know who all the other people are. We will focus on them if you will give us the information, and you'll be in the clear. It's kind of a snitches get stitches thing. You know, you're kind of giving people up in exchange for you won't be the one. You're protected.
Yeah, you go after the middle fish to get the bigger fish, and you clean up with the smaller fish. But you leave that middle fish there so they can give you more areas to fish in, if that makes more sense.
Yes.
Also, the police got the VCR from Percy. It matches, but they never went back to search the house to see if there was anything more, like if there was more than one VCR, if there were 2 VCRs. Because what if Rocky does find a VCR, the killer brings a VCR. So now we have 2 VCRs, and they get the one they think is the murder, and they send it over, and the one that Rocky sold could still be in the house.
So this is a theory that has been out there, and we've talked about it with Tracy, who y'all know sent us the case. And at first I was like, it's possible. I don't think it's likely. But there is one thing that made me kind of open my mind to this. At first I was like, well, Percy was at the house. Why wouldn't she have shown him all the VCRs? Well, if we look back to that conversation when Percy says, I was at my sister's house. We were talking about the crime. I told them I talked to police, and I told them that the police were looking for an RCA VCR. And she goes, an RCA VCR? And he goes, yeah. And she goes, come here. And they go and they look at it, and it's an RCA VCR. It is technically possible that he said RCA from the start. She knew that, let's say, in this theory that we're going with temporarily, that there were more than one, but she knows one of them is RCA. So she's going to show him the RCA VCR. She's not showing him the whatever, the Toshiba or Sony, whatever, because he didn't say that. So that's what kind of opened my mind to that when you go back and look at it.
Let's just say there is not two VCRs, that there's one VCR. We have the killer identified, short, stocky, black male, white t-shirt. We have people verifying that they saw this person leave. The people in the car with Tyrone and the girls yelling at this guy. He goes and stashes the VCR in the alley because now he's been seen.
They say he goes to a bush.
Yeah. Rocky's walking along in the alleyway to go towards the shot house, sees it because it's right across the street, picks it up, looks around. Okay, no one's here. Now I have my collateral.
And here's another point to bring up as well. The 911 call comes in at 12:19. We know that. That's on record. So the killer, and we are just going to pretend that it's Rocky for this because that's who they say that they identified. Let's say that they go to the Iranian store, as they call it. It's closed.
But it's closed.
It's 12 o'clock. Immediately, they head for the shot house. The Iranian store is only a few minutes away. We've looked at it on the map. It's only a few blocks away. Rocky lives a few yards away from Miss Tucker. So if they get there before the police get there, let's say it's sometime between 12:05 and 12:15, Rocky lives right across the street. Once he committed the crime, if he were the one who did it, once he committed the crime, it would have taken him about 30 seconds to get to his house.
Or if he just committed the crime and went straight to the shot house.
Why would you do that?
That's what they were saying, though. They were saying that whoever committed this murder went straight to the shot house to collect and trade on collateral. But the thing is, why would he hang around the streets for 15 additional minutes so that he could be seen by passing cars? And remember, the police, Officer Tilley, did not see any suspects when he pulled up to the house. No one was around the house. So for the killer to have killed Miss Tucker, leaves the house, hang around the street, let Tyrone and his friends see him, and then decides to go to the shot house, that is not a sequence of events that makes sense for somebody who lives across the street.
Because, and my point in bringing up that he lives across the street is, if the man just committed a murder, go change your clothes. It makes no sense. But that timeline is weird too, because according to Miss Dutton, it was shortly after midnight. And I guess it's just with where the store is that they went to and the time they came back down, your killer would have been leaving closer to the 12:19 range because the call was made as soon as the killer left the house. So somewhere 12:15-ish. But they were at their Iranian store a few minutes after 12. So it's just, there's just a lot of questions starting to come up. We are going to stop here. We are about halfway through the court testimony and the trial. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about some forensics or lack thereof. There's still a lot more to come. Many, many, many more dots to connect. And this is just the beginning, my friends.
But Lindsay and I are going to take you to Decatur and we are going to walk these steps and time it ourselves and try to recreate this. So we have got so much more on its way. We've got interviews with this lawyer. We've got letters from Rocky. So we are getting this story from every single source possible. Now, we did reach out to John Mays multiple times asking, can he talk with us? He has not yet responded, but if he does respond, we will definitely get that interview out to you guys too.
A few quick things. At the end of the next episode, we plan to give you guys the details for writing letters or whatever you would like to do to get involved. We're ironing out the last fine details, but I think we're about there. So we'll have that in the next one. Also, March 31st, and we are going to ask for forgiveness from our Patreon supporters, but in lieu of doing our Patreon live feed this month, this case is such a big deal to us that we are going to open it up to everyone. Because as you are quickly learning, there are a lot of people involved, a lot of changing stories, lots of dots to connect. I currently have a map drawn out on a dry erase board in my office, which I showed Jen earlier. And it's like old school style, literally connecting the dots. So I'm sure if you guys are like us, you're going to get people confused. You may have questions. You may have theories we haven't thought of. And so we would love to sit down as a group and discuss that. Don't know at this point if anyone will be with us. It depends on what program we decide to use. Still working all that out, but it will be March 31st. What else? I feel like there's stuff we're forgetting.
Guys, if there is some really great discussions going on right now in our Facebook group. So come on over, join the Facebook group. Don't forget, you do have to answer the questions or we will decline you instantly without remorse. And also, don't forget to rate and review, and to become a Patreon, go to patreon.com/Corpus Delicti, and then you're going to be able to get a part of our Patreon-only feeds. We do a lot of cool stuff for our Patreons. We have a live feed every month that it's just for them. Unfortunately, this month it's going to be an open group.
It's
but
for a good reason. Our heart is in the right place. We're not trying to short you guys, and maybe we'll do something else down the road to make up for it. But
we actually put a lot of some of the materials that we're looking at, court materials, on Patreon, so you can actually see it too. And I think that would probably be reason enough to join Patreon, especially if you get to see the court documents and you get to see the maps that we're looking at.
Yeah, pictures and whatever else we come up with. But yeah, Jen has been diligently writing to Rocky. He has responded a few times now, and it's sweet because he said that he has not written in years. He has not written a letter in years. He doesn't like to particularly, but he said that he did decide to write us, and we are honored that he did choose to respond. And
and I will say this. Someone in my family does struggle with reading due to dyslexia and autism. And I was telling him, I was like, I'm talking to this man right now who struggled just like you. And look at this long letter he wrote me. He wrote me 3 pages. If he can overcome this, I think you can too. And it inspired this member of my family.
Yeah, and he's been pretty positive with us and taught us a few lessons, about our daily lives. Like we said in the last one, I was having a bad day and he sends this letter saying, oh, the world is crazy, just endure. And I'm like, wait a minute, just stuff like that. So much more to come.
Yes, we haven't even gotten to the appeals. We haven't gotten to so much of the story. So y'all stay tuned for future chapters. We will continue on with the Sweet Home Alabama series after we finish up Rocky story, Road to Redemption. Side note, Rocky did recommend a story. We will be doing that one next. And then we have a few Patreon ones that people have supplied us. So be on the lookout for those too.
Absolutely.
But until then, Felicia's going to go wash her hands, wear a mask maybe too. And you know what? Maybe not, depending what state she lives in. We don't know. But
yeah, where does Felicia live anyway?
We don't know. But do the best for you and yours. But until then, bye.
Bye.